There are 7 billion people in the world, and almost all of them use the metric system, except for Americans. If you're watching this video, you're probably one of the few known Americans who still uses Imperial. So why don't Americans use the metric system? We made a whole video about it. In the 18th century, the 13 colonies were at war with Britain, and they really didn't want to be like Britain. The main one being that Americans are psychologically stubborn creatures of habit. When something works, even if it's inconvenient, inefficient, or just plain weird compared to other places, we don't like changing it. In 1959, the US adopted the metric system as its official standard, which probably doesn't mean anything. In 2000, there was the Metric Conversion Act, which said that all federal agencies should use metric. The problem is that these acts apply only to the government. They don't force anyone to actually switch to metric. And the government only has so much money. So even though some parts of the government use metric, many others don't. And since not everyone who works for the government uses metric, it can be hard to get data about how many people use it. But surveys say that about 2/3 of scientists and engineers in the US regularly use metric. Most of the rest only use it occasionally. And there are lots of examples of this. But a survey done in 2014 found that about 1/5 of Americans said that they sometimes or always use metric, while 3/5 said that they never do. Canada, for example, doesn't officially use metric, although 90% of Canadians say that they use it. Not that it matters, because the vast majority of countries in the world use metric. So if you need a plumber in the middle of the night, you should probably live in America. This means that the percentage of Americans who use metric could be anywhere from 15 to 65%. That's a pretty big range. And the truth is, it doesn't matter. The fact that we don't know how many Americans use metric shows that it's not a big deal to most people. For most Americans, the benefits of switching to metric aren't worth the trouble. And since the metric system had been around for quite a while at that point, it seemed like an opportunity to distance themselves from their former colonial rulers by adopting a different measurement system. And as a fan of both liberty and making things as complicated as possible, he came up with a whole new system instead of just using an existing one. He didn't, though. Or at least he isn't credited with inventing any units besides the oddly named Jiffy. The truth is, there isn't a great reason why America didn't adopt the metric system. It just didn't happen, and by the time it became relevant, it was too late. They considered it and even made some plans, but ultimately decided against it. By the time the revolution was over, it no longer seemed very important. And since most people just went along with what they were used to, there wasn't much call to change. This is according to the most widely accepted theory anyway. There are others. One of them says that the US didn't adopt the metric system because Thomas Jefferson was in charge of making the new measurements for the country. But there are lots of reasons why it hasn't happened since then. The US didn't switch to using the same electrical outlets as the rest of the world. There have been power standards for more than a century and a half, and we just never got around to updating ours. We didn't switch to metric partly because of this, but also because there would be so many things to change. Everything from highway signs to textbooks to appliances would have to be replaced. But even if we did update all those things, every single American would still have to get used to thinking in metric. And getting used to something new is hard for people, especially when there's nothing in it for them. And to be clear, there have been movements to get the US to adopt the metric system. It is easy to figure out how many people in the general population use metric, because unlike scientists and engineers, most people aren't using it to do anything. We should mention at this point that there are a few non-Americans who don't use metric. Thank you for watching.